Hello, thank you so much. And welcome to everybody. And it's a real privilege to be here to talk to you all today. And the title says a lot, social and emotional journey. We must remember that this is a journey for these children and things take time. And that's what we're going to look at today, what strategies we need to help children along the way. So the three areas we're going to look at, the key competencies that needed by teachers. We're going to look at some examples of activities that support and develop social and emotional skills in young children. And we'll finish with just looking at a few areas from a physical development point of view and in the environment and how the physical environment supports social and emotional development. So just before we go into the slides, I just want to show you briefly behind me, I've got a whole range of resources. And my message to you from this perspective is always be as prepared as you can, especially with young children. It's so important that being prepared and having resources, because they change and they move all the time, um, means that you can save any distress by being able to change activities, change what you're doing, change positions. So these are some of the competencies that we're going to be thinking about whilst we're going through the session. So what do we mean by development milestones? Milestones provide a framework and they identify where support may be needed. It helps us to find gaps in children's development, and it also gives us indication of next steps. But in terms of this social and emotional element, we're going to be thinking about children's attachment, how smiling can make such a difference, and what happens when strangers come in. Because often you can have a very quiet, calm room in your setting, and then somebody comes through the door, could be somebody that works there, or it could be somebody you're showing around. And straight away, children get very upset. So, how do we manage these transitions? And then the separation anxiety, which can start later. I often find children about 18 months, perhaps, if they've never been left before, find it more difficult than a very young baby because they're more aware. They're aware of who their parents are, they know which adults they're familiar with and which they aren't. So they form firm bonds from a very early age and they look for comfort, how we hold them. I have a little baby Alex here. And, how we care for the babies, how we look at them, how we hold them whilst we're talking to them. And also, we sometimes hand a baby over to another adult, but we have to really understand whether they're ready for that transition or not. Now, let me just talk about behaviour just briefly. Challenging behaviour can be influenced by various contextual factors such as the environment, relationships, and daily routines. And we have to consider all of these factors when we're working out why a child might be upset. I'm just going to place my child gently down there. But also, it's really important to remember that challenging behaviour is generally challenging to the adult. The children aren't deliberately providing challenging behaviour. So it's how we see that child and how we recognise why the behaviour is happening. But we also need to learn strategies for managing that. Because as it says, up on your screen here, emotions can be two-way. So if by the child being upset, it's making the adult upset, then that can sometimes exacerbate the behaviours that we're seeing. And some of the different ways we can help with this is through consistency of how we speak to them, tone of voice, and the routines. So, if the children are being dropped off each day, are the same people greeting them at the door? Is it different people? Have we changed the environment so when they walk in, the displays are all different? Sometimes we have to prepare children for change so that they're not shocked the next day when they come in. And then the internal and external influences on behaviour, these relate often to the child's own characteristics and those of the immediate caregiver around them and how they react and interact with each other. So, for example, external influences could be as simple as noise, it could be a different smell, even food cooking, or if you've decided to use sort of fragrances like lavender, which sometimes help babies in sleep rooms. Not all children will respond to these in the same way. And we have to manage these so that the children, we recognise which children struggle and which don't. And they're all different, and we mustn't forget how different they are. And then looking at, as you can see here, the attachments they find. If you're leaving the room, if you have to hand the child over to somebody else, do you tell the child? Even if it's a baby, they have a right to be told, oh, I've got to leave the room. I'm going to give you to Sabina and she's going to take care of you now. And all of these little steps mustn't be ignored because some people would say, oh, the baby doesn't talk or the baby doesn't understand. But that doesn't mean we can't use our kind voices when we do these transitions. And when we're talking about the external influences, such as the environment, the classroom layout, the social dynamics we're talking about amongst children, children don't always get on with other children. We can't always tell why, but you could sit two children together and they'd play very nicely side by side. But then you might sit them with another child and they don't get on. And that could be for all sorts of reasons that we don't understand. But we need to recognize the feelings, the emotions with the children and try and understand the way they present them to you. Some children could go very, very quiet. Some children will cry. So what we need to think about is knowing each child individually. We can't possibly have a one size fits all. And then the last point on here in terms of collaboration from their families, we need to know the children's personalities. We need to know their dispositions. How do they deal with strangers? Have they got siblings? Are they used to other children being around? So getting to know the child will really help us to understand the different behaviours that they display. And then we, as the teacher, we've got to be incredibly patient and we've got to be creative and find different ways to help a child overcome whatever it is they're feeling. Just one example again that I will use with my little baby here. This is Alex, by the way. I've found that some children, when they're upset, they want to be comforted this way. But I've also found with young babies that they sometimes want to be held along your arm this way. Sometimes they want to make forward and see what's going on. And that's just a very small example of how we need to keep adjusting so that we can find what suits that baby. Talking to them quietly, whispering in their ear, maybe just stroking the side of their face. These are all things that will help us manage the different behaviours emotional behaviours that we see with children. Even with a doll, I won't drop it on the floor. I put it down gently. So we must remember, and I love this actually, the innate goodness of infants. And it's crucial because, you know, children are born needing to learn everything that's going on around them. And like we said at the beginning, it is a journey and we need to help the children through that journey. And just because they've done something once doesn't mean that they're going to get it every time. And they won't remember. They've got to experience the emotions just as they experience everything else and be able to say to the children, it's okay to feel like this. Tell me why you're feeling like that. Obviously, if they're not a talker, we have to use the strategies I've just already mentioned. But by believing that they are good, as in children are born with this innocence, then we have to foster this relationship with them, build up their trust. They have to trust us because we have to trust the child because they're new into the world. And this positive approach with the children and knowing that we can support them through whatever emotions is going to make that relationship stronger. And hopefully the children will look forward to coming in and coming to see you and being handed over. But also this whole transition of getting to know other caregivers in the centre, because you can't be with that same child all the time, even if you want to. And that whole transition when parents introduce children into the centres, how do we do that? How many settling in sessions are there? Can the parents stay and play for a while before that handover? All of these things build up these strong emotional impulses in the children's brain and enable them to settle in. But there will be times when you think they're settled and then they have separation anxiety again. And that is quite normal. And I think we have to remember things are normal, however they happen with these young children. So think about this. Underestimating a child can be as damaging of having too high expectations as well. We've got to allow children to try. We've got to enable them to make attempts to do things, even if they can't achieve it. We're there as the adult to step in and help. And that's why we need to know what the cues and signals are. We've got to understand what they are and recognize facial expressions, body language, but you must be observing all the time. You can't not look at children, particularly when they're non-verbal. We need to know where they are, what they're doing, and how they're feeling. We've got to be careful of not giving them too much to do. You know, if a child wants to be quiet and is just looking around the room, then that's okay. We all need downtime at some point, and children are just the same. And I think, you know, we can overstimulate by putting too much colour in the environment, too many resources, sort of too many bright colours around. So we need to reflect on our environment and think, is it a calm, peaceful environment? The resources we put in it are what the children will play and learn from. But what do the walls look like? You know, are they over the top? So self-reflection is really important when considering this. And then underestimating their abilities, maybe trying to do too much for the children all the time. Because sometimes we're rushing, maybe they can help to put their cardigan and coats and jackets, and trousers and shoes on. Maybe sometimes we actually do it for them because we want them to be quick. But actually, do we allow them time to show us what they can do? And also to self-soothe. If we say to them, it's okay to feel like this, do we give them time? We don't say, stop crying. We don't say, you know, don't be a baby. Let's just talk to them, show them things, and keep allowing them to help themselves as well. And punishment and time out, there's not enough time to go into all of these strategies today. But with very young children, it's about positive reinforcement and taking away where things might be negative for them. I feel that we have to go through these quite quickly, and some of these things you could spend a whole day on. But today we're just going to look at the key points, and hopefully you'll be able to reflect on these and reflect in your centres on your own strategies. So, autonomy, you know, we observe and respond to children automatically. We observe their cues, their signals, and respond sensitively to their needs and preferences. And this includes providing comfort, as we've spoken about, and offering engaging activities. And as I've said here, I've got a range of different things behind. I've got little cars, I've got soft toys, I've got books. So having lots of different things you can use to distract them is very helpful for you as the teacher, because if one thing doesn't work, you don't have to sort of spend time rooting around to find something else to replace it with. And the physical boundaries as well. Not every child wants to be picked up. Do we give them time to move freely if they're learning to crawl or beginning to stand up? We've got to allow them this time and to let them try and get where they're going, because that could cause them to be distressed, and also trying not to overly preempt, but just sort of watch and help. So, for example, if you've got toys that are around the children and we want them to start moving and being independent, do we put them a little bit further away so that they can crawl towards them? So thinking about that autonomy, what are we doing to enable the children to achieve that autonomy? And what are we doing that might prevent that? So these are all things to consider when reflecting on how you support children's early development. So we've got two different pictures here. The child that looking very upset and showing signs of distress. And we've talked about, I just already mentioned the transitions. And some caregivers will just say, oh, you'll get used to it. He'll stop crying in a minute. That isn't the approach. The approach is this side with this lovely, okay, I know you're feeling upset, but let's go through this together. Let's see where I can help you. And, help the children to feel better. Don't think that just leaving them on their own is going to help because we don't know why they're crying. We just know that they're not happy. So we can't assume anything. So we have to know, we have to try. So going forward, we've got some activities now, um, just that you could do with the children, just to try. And although they're called activities, I would prefer to talk about learning opportunities and learning experiences because feelings and emotions is it's an internal thing. And you can do an activity, and an activity suggests you do it and then it ends. Whereas what we're talking about is sort of ongoing, continuous provision where we're supporting these children through whatever it is we're going to do with them, with the different resources available to us. And there should be no time limit. Obviously, there's a sleep time, there's snack time, there's meal times, but especially with young children, their routines are very important. But in between that, we can play these little games with them, do these friendly, warm, and welcoming activities with them that help them to learn, help them to develop, but also help them feel safe and secure. So we're always trying with children to find out what they like, what their interests are. Um, but this first slide here of activities, this is something that's used in many, many centres. It's actually using faces to help children recognise the emotions as well. And I think you can point out and talk to them about the different faces. And sometimes a child will point and say, this is how I'm feeling right now. And they recognize it. But that takes a little bit of time. But it's a very useful tool to have. And some of the nurseries I've been in, they have these faces on the wall. Some of them have them at the door so that when children are coming in the morning, they can point to how they're feeling there and then that morning. And it really creates conversation and interaction between them and their caregiver. And I love this cozy nook reading, but also think about how you do that. So where you've got books and reading, you can, make sure that perhaps your book has got some of the characters in it that as well as just reading it and using your voice and sharing the book and the pictures with the children, that you can actually turn it into a wider activity so that they can start to put the practical element of recognizing the characteristics. I mean, this one's about a dog. Um, and I've got two dogs here. And this particular one is really soft. So if a child's feeling a little bit anxious, it's a really good tool to sort of do this with the dog, with the child. But also, straight away, you've got a mathematical option here because of the different sizes of the dogs. So think about these areas and what you're going to put in it, but also think about how it relates to learning opportunities at the same time, because emotions and learning opportunities do not have to be separated. And using books is such a lovely distraction technique. Puppets. Puppets are amazing to use with children. I mean, this picture represents a puppet show with lots of different faces. And you could do it again with emotions, but also just using puppets to talk to and say, oh, my dog's feeling really sad today. Can you help me make him feel better? So using handheld objects as well as the puppet theatre will really help children to learn to be empathetic. And again, you could say, oh, this dog has hurt his paw. What can we do to help him? So there's so many ways you can extend the learning whilst you're supporting children to have this enjoyment and fun and be laughing and smiling so that they can experience and understand the range of emotions. Music. Well, music is my first love, I think. I've always done music and singing with children. It's just something that I do automatically. I used to keep a little keyboard in my pocket, a really mini one, so that I could play songs and nursery rhymes whenever I visited the settings I was visiting. But you can have quiet songs that help them relax. You can have bouncy songs, songs that they can move to. So you just again play around with it. And also a mixture of classical music, popular music. It doesn't matter what music you use, but it's really engaging for children. And as I will be talking about later, children don't keep still, they keep moving. So we need to enable that movement to happen. Mirrors are interesting, very interesting, because sometimes, like in this picture you can see on your screen, the caregiver's smiling and the child smiling, and you can see that in the mirror. One thing I've noticed, if a child is crying, they don't usually like to see themselves in a mirror. So be very mindful of that. But also curiosity for a child seeing themselves in a mirror. It takes a while for them to work out that there's two people there and two people in the mirror. So it's a lovely, lovely experience, but just be mindful that if they're crying, they might really not be happy seeing themselves looking like that. Baby sign language. Many of the nurses in the UK introduce baby sign language, and a lot of parents go to signing classes. And it's a really, really useful way for non-verbal children to perhaps start to show what they want and how they feel. And you can very easily get sheets with simple baby signs, obvious ones, like drink or hungry, because they want to eat. So it's really worthwhile considering looking at sign language. And often in the UK, we'll bring a sign language session into the nurseries for the parents, perhaps as well as for the caregivers. So, but it's very easy to get these and start looking at it yourself and experimenting to see how well children do. It's wonderful when they master it. And it's a very good skill for children with special needs, particularly who don't have language. And it means that everybody communicate together. Um, Peekaboo. I love the idea of the peekaboo. And again, you can use scarves and things like that, putting it in front of your face and just whisking it away, or just with your hand. But um, babies will hopefully chuckle and giggle when you're doing this with them because they will they will just find it funny. But it also helps them to realize that things that sometimes you can't see them and then they come back into sight. And that actually is very reassuring for a baby. So, but you can do it when you take the scarf away, you might have a different face. Next time, a different face. So you can use this to demonstrate different emotions as well. But again, be mindful if you're looking sad or angry, depending on the child's own experience, they might immediately feel upset. So you've got to test the waters and try these things out carefully. I think this is a lovely activity to do in a group because you smile and you pass the smile on to the next person, and then the next person passes it on to the next person so that you're going around the room with a smile. And again, you've got to depend on the age of the child, but toddlers soon get the hang of this. And again, it's a very simple thing to do. Textures and emotions. I've seen these quite often in nurseries with the boards that children can touch. It's very good for language development because you can talk about what they feel like. but also there have been some lovely examples where people have used a more rough fabric to represent feeling angry or annoyed, and a softer fabric for calm. But again, I've got two different scarves here. This one is obviously quite see-through. This one is very, very soft. So thinking about the senses of the children, and having different materials, again, you can extend these activities and resources in so many different ways, and leave them in the room, and the children will go for them themselves. And you can ask them, oh, why did you pick that one? Which one do you like the best? So very open-ended. Um, Now this is a really interesting stage for children, and I think calling it guided interaction or gentle guided interaction is really, really key, because children won't automatically share, but they need to recognize that there are other children sharing their environment. And, we can't insist that they share, but they could show each other what they've got and touch them and just gently encourage them to play together. And there are different stages of play where they play on their own, side by side, before they interact with each other fully when they get older. But it's all baby steps, you know, building on these different events and activities where they get used to the social play. I sort of mentioned music earlier, so I won't say too much about this, but just remember that singing can take place anywhere. Peekaboo can take place anywhere. Don't just restrict it to when you're on the carpet or in the room base. Changing nappy time, getting them settled to sleep, putting coats on and shoes. You can be singing at any time, and it really is distracting. It's very good for language development, and it's very good for emotional well-being, and bringing instruments and things that make sounds as well along the way. And it helps them to calm. And poetry is a really good thing to use as well. So, just take these moments. When I was teaching in school, I kept my guitar in the corner of the classroom, and my children were 8 years old at the time in the classroom. But every so often, if they were getting a little bit hyper, I'd stop everything and we'd have a song, and it would just bring them back down again. And then, sort of finally, for this section, exploring spaces, boxes, baskets, and blankets. You can do anything with them. You can write on them, you can crawl inside them. And the children often want to experience small spaces. They need to test themselves. And I'm sure you've seen them before. They'll crawl under a table or under a chair. So rather than telling them not to, if you see that that's a phase they're going to, well, then let's make it happen for them. And some children might not want the blanket pulled over the top of the box, but some might. And then they get this feeling, I'm still safe, I'm still secure, but I can come out again. So making dens and having things around the room where they can manipulate themselves into is always a really, really fun activity. So, just got a few minutes left for me to talk to you. So let's just think about the physical environment and how this supports social and emotional development. The environment will vary depending where the child is and in the setting, what the rooms are like. Some settings are like homes with small rooms like houses, some are big open plan. So we have to think about how it feels to be in the room and what does it feel like for a child in that room, and are things at the right height for them initially so that they can get what they need. Because often, if children can't access things, they're going to get upset. So we need to manage their access to the resources in the environment carefully. Also, a very key point I'd like to make is if there's things in the environment you don't want them to touch, then they shouldn't be there. At home, it's different. They have to learn certain things are allowed to be touched and played with and others aren't. But in a centre, if you want to manage behaviour, then you really need to make things available so that we're saying positive things to children and not negative. So I'm just going to flick through a few examples here, and you can see in this picture that everything is at the height of the child and there's a range of things that they can access. And obviously, we have to supervise them, but by allowing children choice and allowing them free flow to move around these things, you're going to manage behaviour. It's a big step. One of the nurseries I turned around in England, which went to this open-ended provision, immediately after the first week realised that children's behaviour was so much better than when they restricted the children to what they could do and when they could do it. It was remarkable. And the learning opportunities just grew because the children were engaged in things they wanted to do and therefore learning from those resources. It's good to have things in different areas like the building blocks and the construction and to encourage children to work together. But another point I would say is don't worry if children take the building blocks over to another area because what they're doing is in their mind, they're playing a game. So I know it's quite difficult sometimes, but we have to see where that play goes so that we can interact with them and extend it. We've talked about mirrors before. And again, you can see here two children sitting down and one little girl just about to stand up, but she can reach these books. She can help herself. So we're supporting the autonomy of the children, which we spoke about earlier. And again, just looking at the caregiver here, supporting a child that's just learning to stand and how we've got activities at different heights that will, and resources, sorry, at different heights that will support this. And again, there is something called communication friendly spaces by a lady called Elizabeth Jarman. And she sort of came up with this idea that children needed sometimes to take themselves off and just be away from the group or just be maybe with one or two people. And it's okay. They just want to find themselves, have some quiet time, and extend their own thinking on their own. And again, we talked about the physical element of the environment. Children can get very frustrated if they can't get what they want. But we know that they have to go through different stages to be able to walk, reach, and access things. So by providing resources like this, we are helping the children. And from an emotional point of view, because we're enabling them to do what they need to do at that stage, we're less likely to have the children getting upset and frustrated because I'm sure you know, toddlers, they talk about terrible twos. It's only frustration when they're going through these transitions. So I've just given you a really whistle-stop tour, and I hope that you've sort of seen some of the examples, can go away and reflect on the key points that the emotions, we want the positive emotions, positive reinforcement, interaction and engagement between the adult and the child, and making sure that the environment supports their emotions in the most positive way. But I do want you to take away this consideration about transitions in and out, transitions between feeling upset and getting them to feel better. It's all a transition and it's all a journey. Thank you so much for listening.